My name is Kira Voss, and I thought I knew everything about fear until I met Jake Morrison. The human stumbled into our trading post on Nexus 7 like a ghost from the old wars, dragging himself through the airlock with blood seeping through his torn jacket. His eyes held that particular brand of exhaustion that comes from running too long, too far, with nowhere left to go. Most species would have collapsed by now. Humans apparently just kept walking. Medical assistance, he wheezed, leaning heavily against the reception desk. Please. I should have turned him away. Nexus 7 was neutral territory, sure, but harboring fugitives was bad for business. The hegemony had been cracking down on human sympathizers ever since the resistance started their little rebellion. But something about this one made me pause. Maybe it was the way he said please, not demanding, not entitled like most humans I'd encountered, just tired. Kira, don't. My partner Zane whispered in our native tongue. You know what happened to the Vorth family for helping one of them. I ignored him and activated the medical scanner. The readout made my secondary heart skip a beat. 3 broken ribs, internal bleeding, severe dehydration, and enough combat stims in his system to kill a Vraxian. This human should have been dead 6 hours ago. How are you still standing? I asked, genuinely curious. Jake lifted his head, and I saw something that made my skin crawl. It's not malice or anger, but a kind of quiet determination that seemed to burn behind his eyes like a dying star. Spite, mostly. I had to laugh. Here was a member of the most stubborn species in the galaxy, bleeding out in my shop, and he was making jokes. Well, spite won't fix those ribs. Back room, now. As I guided him to the medical bay, his jacket fell open. That's when I saw it, the symbol. My legs gave out. Just like that, 300 pounds of Arconian muscle and bone hit the floor like a dropped rock. Zane rushed over, chittering in alarm. But I couldn't take my eyes off the patch sewn into the human's uniform. A stylized phoenix rising from flames, wings spread wide, with 7 stars forming a crown above its head. The Lost Legion's mark. Impossible, I breathed. Jake looked down at me with confusion. Lady, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. A ghost. If only he knew. That symbol, I managed, pointing with a trembling claw. Where did you get it? Daddy. He glanced down at his chest, then back at me. This old thing? Found it in a derelict ship. Figured it looked cool. He paused, studying my face. Why? Does it mean something to you? Does it mean something? The understatement of the millennium. I pulled myself to my feet, my mind racing. The stories my grandmother used to tell, the ones the elders said were just folklore. The prophecies that spoke of a time when the Lost Legion would return, led by one who bore their mark but knew not its meaning. You have no idea what you're wearing, do you? I said slowly. Jake shrugged. Nope. But judging by the way you just face-planted, I'm guessing it's important. Important. The symbol of the most legendary human military unit in galactic history, worn by a scruffy fugitive who thought it looked cool. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a plasma blade. Sit, I commanded, pointing to the medical chair. We need to talk. Look, I appreciate the help, but I can't stay long. The hegemony is probably tracking me, and I don't want to bring trouble to your door. Too late for that, human. The moment you walked in here wearing that symbol, trouble became inevitable. I activated the medical bay's privacy shields and turned to face him. My name is Kira Voss, and my family has been waiting 3 generations for someone like you to show up. Jake's hand drifted toward his sidearm. Smart boy. Waiting for what, exactly? For the return of the Lost Legion. I knelt down on one knee, the way my grandmother had taught me, the way her grandmother had taught her, for the fulfillment of the Covenant of Stars. Okay, you're officially freaking me out now. Jake kept his hand near his weapon but didn't draw it. I don't know anything about any Lost Legion or Covenant. I'm just a guy trying to stay alive. Just a guy. Right, a guy who'd somehow managed to acquire the most sacred symbol in Arconian culture, who'd survived injuries that should have killed him twice over, and who radiated the kind of presence that made even hardened traitors think twice about crossing him. The Lost Legion. I began, settling into storytelling mode, was a human military unit that served during the First Galactic War, 500 years ago. They were different from other human forces. They fought alongside alien allies, treated other species as equals, and died protecting worlds that weren't even their own. Thus, Jake's expression shifted slightly. Interest, maybe, or recognition. And they made a promise. A covenant with the free peoples of the galaxy. That if the darkness ever returned, If tyranny ever threatened to consume the stars again, they would rise from the ashes to fight once more. I gestured to his chest. That symbol isn't just a military insignia. It's a sacred trust. You're talking about myths and legends, Jake said, but his voice lacked conviction. Am I? I stood and walked to the wall display, calling up a holographic star chart. 3 months ago, the hegemony began their final push against the outer colonies. 17 worlds have fallen, and the resistance is barely holding on. Sound familiar? Jake's jaw tightened. I might have heard something about that. The prophecies speak of a time when hope would seem lost, when the free peoples would cry out in desperation. And in that hour, the lost legion would return, led by one who bears their mark but knows not its meaning. I turned back to him. You're him, aren't you? The one we've been waiting for. I'm nobody special, Jake said firmly. Just a former soldier trying to make amends for past mistakes. Former soldier, I repeated. What unit? He hesitated. Classified. Not anymore, it isn't. The hegemony marked you for death, didn't they? What did you do to earn that honor? Jake was quiet for a long moment, his fingers unconsciously tracing the symbol on his chest. I refused an order. A direct order from high command to Glass's civilian colony said I wouldn't murder innocents in the name of peace. There it was. The spark of something greater than himself, the moral compass that wouldn't bend even under the weight of military discipline, just like the original Lost Legion. How many others refused with you? 6. We tried to warn the colonists, help them evacuate, got most of them out before the bombardment began. His voice grew hard. My team didn't make it. I'm the only one left. You saved innocent lives at the cost of your own future, I said softly. That's exactly what the Lost Legion would have done. Stop calling them that. Jake snapped, finally showing real emotion. They're dead. All of them. Just like my team, just like everyone else who stood up to the hegemony. Good people don't win wars, lady. They just die with clear consciences. The bitterness in his voice was like acid, eating away at whatever hope he might have had left. But beneath it, I could hear something else. Pain. Loss. The weight of carrying on when everyone else had fallen. Maybe, I said. But sometimes they inspire others to take up the fight. Before Jake could respond, the proximity alarm started blaring. Zane's voice crackled over the comm system, barely controlled panic leaking through his translator. Hegemony patrol ships just dropped out of hyperspace. They're demanding permission to board. Jake was on his feet instantly, weapons drawn. I'm sorry. I never meant to bring this down on you. Put those away, I snapped. If you want to honor that symbol you're wearing, you'll let me handle this. I activated the emergency protocols, sealing the medical bay and switching to backup power. Zane, tell them we're conducting a hazardous materials inventory and can't allow boarding for another hour. Cite Galactic Safety Code 77 Alpha. That'll buy us maybe 30 minutes, Zane replied. What's the plan? Good question. What was the plan? Harbor a fugitive and risk everything my family had built, or turn him over to the hegemony and watch another spark of resistance get snuffed out. I looked at Jake, really looked at him. Beneath the exhaustion and cynicism, I could see the man who'd thrown away everything to save strangers, the kind of person who wore symbols of hope even when he'd lost faith in hope itself. The plan, I said slowly, is to give you a choice. Jake lowered his weapons. I'm listening. Option 1, you surrender. Turn yourself in, hope for a quick execution, and let the hegemony add another trophy to their collection. I paused. Option 2, you trust me. Let me show you something that might change your perspective on this whole Lost Legion business. And if I choose option 2? I smiled, showing far too many teeth. Then you're going to find out why the hegemony really wants you dead. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. Outside, I could hear the rumble of hegemony landing craft touching down on our pad. Jake stared at the symbol on his chest, then at me, then at the sealed door that was all that stood between him and a firing squad. You know what? He said finally. I've made worse decisions. Show me. I activated the hidden passage behind the medical scanner, revealing a tunnel that led deep into Nexus 7's ancient cave system. Follow me, and try not to die. The Elders are going to want to meet you. Elders? Elders? The survivors of the original covenant. The ones who've been keeping the faith alive all these years. I stepped into the tunnel. The ones who've been preparing for your return. Jake followed, shaking his head. This is insane. Welcome to the Resistance, I replied. Insane is our middle name. The tunnel led down through layers of compressed stone and metal, past the commercial levels where most of Nexus 7's inhabitants lived and worked, down to the forgotten depths where older secrets lay buried. Emergency lighting cast dancing shadows on the walls, making the carved symbols seem to move in the periphery of vision. These markings, Jake said, running his fingers over the ancient script. I've seen something like them before. Where? Maat, the derelict ship where I found this uniform. There were similar carvings throughout the vessel. He paused. Almost like they were trying to tell a story. They were, but not the story he thought. The symbols were coordinates, star charts, and resource caches hidden throughout the galaxy. The Lost Legion's final gift to those who would carry on their mission. We reached the end of the tunnel, where a massive blast door blocked our path. I placed my hand on the scanner and spoke the old words in my native tongue. By flame and star, by wing and crown, the covenant endures. The door cycled open, revealing a vast cavern that took Jake's breath away. The space was filled with equipment, weapons, supplies, and technology that shouldn't have existed. At the center stood a holographic display showing the entire galaxy, with red zones marking hegemony-controlled space and tiny green dots representing free worlds still holding out. But it wasn't the equipment that made Jake stagger, it was the people. Dozens of them, representing every major species in the galaxy. Draconian warriors in powered armor, Braxian technicians working on advanced weapons systems, Centauri pilots running combat simulations, even a few hegemony defectors in modified uniforms, all of them wearing the Phoenix symbol. Impossible, Jake whispered. An elderly Arconian female approached us, her scales bearing the scars of countless battles. Nothing is impossible, young human, merely improbable. She studied Jake with eyes that had seen empires rise and fall. I am Elder Mira Voss, Kira's grandmother and keeper of the covenant. And you, Jake Morrison, are exactly what we have been waiting for. How do you know my name? We've been tracking your movements since you liberated the colony on Kepler Prime. Your actions have inspired resistance cells across 17 systems. She gestured to the assembled crowd. These are the children and grandchildren of those who served alongside the original Lost Legion. We've spent centuries preparing for this moment. Jake looked around the cavern, taking in the faces of beings who should have been enemies, all united by a symbol he'd thought was just decoration. This is all because of something I'm wearing? No, Elder Voss said firmly. This is because of something you are. The symbol merely helped us recognize it. I don't understand. The Lost Legion was never about the uniforms or the ranks or the military structure, she explained. It was about the idea that different species could fight together as equals, that freedom was worth preserving regardless of the cost. She pointed to his chest. That symbol represents hope, and hope, young human, is the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy. Jake was quiet for a long moment, processing everything he'd seen. Finally, he spoke. The hegemony. They know about this place, they suspect, Elder Voss admitted. But they've never found concrete proof. See, until now. Until I led them right to your door. Jake's voice was heavy with guilt. I should leave. Before I get you all killed. You could, Kira said, stepping forward. But then what? You keep running until they finally corner you? Die alone in some back alley shootout, and let everything you've sacrificed be for nothing? At least I wouldn't take innocence down with me. Innocence? Elder Voss laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Look around you, boy. Do we look innocent to you? She had a point. The assembled beings were clearly veterans, their postures and bearing marking them as soldiers, spies, and rebels. This wasn't a humanitarian organization. This was a military force that had been preparing for war. What do you want from me? Jake asked. We want you to be what you already are. Elder Voss replied. It's a leader who puts principles above orders. It's a soldier who fights for the innocent rather than the powerful. It's a symbol of hope in dark times. And if I refuse, then we'll help you escape and wish you well. She paused. But the hegemony won't stop hunting you, and eventually they'll win. Because that's what happens when good people stand alone. Jake looked at the holographic display, at the shrinking green dots that represented the last free worlds, at the faces of beings who'd spent their lives preparing for a war they might not win, at the symbol on his chest that had somehow become the center of everything. What would you need me to do? Elder Voss smiled. What the original Lost Legion did, fight impossible odds. Inspire others to join the cause, show the galaxy that the hegemony can be beaten. That's a tall order for one guy. Good thing you won't be alone. The sound of explosions echoed through the cavern as the hegemony found the tunnel entrance. Emergency klaxons began wailing, and the assembled beings moved with practiced efficiency toward their battle stations. "Seems like the decision's been made for us," Jake said grimly. "The decision was made the moment you put on that uniform," Elder Voss replied. "Everything else has just been confirmation." Jake drew his sidearms, checking the charge levels with automatic precision. "All right then. What's the plan?" "Simple," Kira said, hefting a plasma rifle that looked like it could punch through a starship's hull. "We hold them here while the others escape through the back tunnels, standard delaying action. And after that?" "Daunt." Elder Voss activated a communications array, sending out signals to hidden bases across the galaxy. "After that, we show the hegemony what happens when you corner the Lost Legion." The first hegemony soldiers breached the blast door just as the response signals began flooding in. Dozens of them. Then hundreds, then thousands. Hidden cells activating across known space, resistance fighters emerging from the shadows, entire worlds declaring their intention to fight. Jake watched the display with something approaching awe. All this because of one symbol? Because of what that symbol represents, Elder Voss corrected. Because of what you represent. The battle was joined with a roar of gunfire and screaming aliens. Jake found himself in the center of it all, the phoenix on his chest gleaming under the muzzle flashes, leading beings he'd never met in a fight he'd never chosen. And for the first time in months, he felt like he was exactly where he belonged. The hegemony soldiers poured through the breach like water through a cracked dam, their crimson armor gleaming under the emergency lights. I'd seen plenty of battles in my lifetime, but watching Jake Morrison fight was something entirely different. He moved like liquid death, every shot calculated, every movement economical, but it wasn't his skill that impressed me. It was the way the others responded to him. Braxian techs who'd never held weapons suddenly became deadly marksmen. Centauri pilots abandoned their flight simulators to join the ground fight. Even the normally cautious hegemony defectors threw themselves into combat with reckless abandon. The symbol on his chest seemed to glow brighter with each fallen enemy. "Fall back to position 2, Jake called out, his voice cutting through the chaos like a plasma blade. "Overlapping fields of fire, watch your crossfire zones." How did a disgraced soldier know our defensive positions better than some of our own people? Elder Voss caught my questioning look and smiled grimly. "The original Lost Legion helped design this place," she said, ducking as a plasma bolt seared the air above us. Her tactical knowledge was encoded in the construction plans. Of course it was. Because apparently 500-year-old human military engineers were still better at fortress design than anyone else in the galaxy. A hegemony assault trooper broke through our left flank, raising his weapon toward a group of wounded refugees. Jake appeared behind him like a ghost, snapping the soldier's neck with a move that would have made a Vraxian assassin jealous. "Evacuation status," he barked into his comm unit. 60% complete. Came Zane's voice, strained but functional. "The transport ships are loading as fast as they can, not fast enough." Jake surveyed the battlefield with tactical eyes. "They're bringing up heavy weapons. This position won't hold much longer." Elder Voss activated an ancient control panel, her claws dancing over keys that hadn't been touched in decades. "Then perhaps it's time to show them why we've been preparing for so long." The cavern floor began to rumble. Sections of rock slid away, revealing weapon emplacements that belonged in a museum. Except these weren't museum pieces. As pieces. They were fully functional, maintained in perfect condition, and absolutely terrifying. "Are those pulse cannons?" Jake asked, staring at the massive weapons rising from their hidden housings. "Mark 7 naval defense arrays." Elder Voss confirmed. "The Lost Legion's parting gift. They knew someday we'd need them." The first salvo from the hidden weapons turned 3 squads of hegemony soldiers into smoking craters. The second salvo punched through the cavern's ceiling and took out 2 of their dropships. By the third salvo, the remaining enemy forces were retreating in full panic. "Well," Jake said, watching the hegemony troops flee toward their remaining transports, "that was anticlimactic." "Don't get comfortable," I warned. "They'll be back with orbital bombardment platforms. This base is compromised. Then we abandon it." Jake turned to Elder Voss. "What about the other sites? Are they ready? Ready for what exactly?" "To go on the offensive." Jake's expression had changed, the weariness replaced by something harder and more focused. "If we're going to do this, we do it right. No more hiding in caves, no more running from system to system. We take the fight to them." Elder Voss studied him carefully. "You're talking about open war." I'm talking about finishing what the original Lost Legion started. Jake gestured to the holographic display, where green dots were appearing faster than the system could track them. Look at those response signals. Half the galaxy is ready to fight if someone gives them hope, if someone shows them it's possible to win. And you think you're that someone? Jake was quiet for a moment, his hand unconsciously touching the phoenix symbol. No, but this is. He looked around at the assembled beings, at the weapons and technology that had been hidden for centuries, at the faces of people who'd never given up hope. The Lost Legion was never about one person. It was about all of us. A new signal appeared on the display, broadcasting on all frequencies. Admiral Korath's face materialized in the hologram, his reptilian features twisted with rage. "Attention terrorists and traitors," the hegemony commander snarled. "You have 1 hour to surrender the human fugitive Jake Morrison. Failure to comply will result in the sterilization of Nexus 7 and all surrounding systems." "Charming fellow," Jake commented. "I'm guessing negotiation isn't his strong suit." "Korath doesn't negotiate," Elder Voss said grimly. "He exterminates. His fleet has glassed 17 worlds in the past year alone. Then we'd better make sure he doesn't get the chance to add another." Jake turned to the communications array. "Can this thing reach all the resistance cells? Every hidden base, every sleeper agent, every sympathizer in hegemony space," I confirmed. "Good." Jake stepped up to the transmitter, squaring his shoulders. "Open the channel." The holographic display flickered, then stabilized, showing Jake's image broadcasting across the galaxy. In the background, the phoenix symbol on his uniform was clearly visible. "My name is Jake Morrison," he began, his voice steady and clear, "and I'm here to tell you that the war is over." Murmurs of confusion rippled through the cavern. Even I wasn't sure where he was going with this. "Not because we've surrendered," Jake continued, "but because we've already won. Every time the hegemony tries to crush hope, it grows stronger. Every world they destroy creates 10 more rebels. Every innocent life they take proves that we're fighting for something worth dying for." The response was immediate. Signals flooded in from across the galaxy as resistance cells acknowledged the transmission. Hidden fleets powered up their engines. Sleeper agents activated their deep cover missions. Entire star systems began openly defying hegemony authority. "The Lost Legion has returned," Jake said, and I could hear the weight of prophecy in his words, not as ghosts from the past, but as guardians of the future. "We are your neighbors, your friends, your family members who refuse to kneel to tyrants. We are everyone who believes that freedom is worth fighting for." Admiral Korath's face reappeared on a split screen, his eyes blazing with fury. "Empty words from a dead man. In 53 minutes, your pathetic base will be reduced to radioactive dust." "Maybe," Jake replied calmly. "But it won't matter, because for every one of us you kill, 10 more will take our place. That's how hope works, Admiral. It's contagious. We shall see." Korath cut the transmission. Jake turned back to us, and I saw something in his expression that made my blood run cold. Not fear or desperation, but a kind of quiet certainty that spoke of decisions already made. "Evacuation status?" he asked again. 95% complete," Zane reported. "Just the command staff and essential personnel left." "Good. Get them out." "What about you?" I demanded. Jake smiled, and it was the saddest thing I'd ever seen. "Someone needs to make sure Korath gets a proper welcome when he arrives." "You're not staying here to die," Elder Voss said firmly. "The prophecies speak of the Lost Legion rising again, not falling again." "The prophecies," Jake said gently, "speak of hope being passed from one generation to the next. Sometimes that requires sacrifice." Before any of us could stop him, he activated the base's lockdown protocols. Emergency barriers slammed down, sealing the command center and trapping him inside. The evacuation tunnels remained open, but there was no way to reach Jake now. "You stubborn, suicidal fool," I shouted, pounding on the barrier. "This isn't what the symbol means, isn't it?" Jake's voice came through the comm system, distorted but determined. "The original Lost Legion died protecting people they'd never met. They gave their lives so that others could be free. If that's not what this symbol means, then what does it mean?" I wanted to argue, to find some flaw in his logic, but the terrible truth was that he was right. The Lost Legion had always been about sacrifice for the greater good, about putting principles above personal survival. "There has to be another way," I said desperately. "There is." Jake began activating systems throughout the base, bringing defensive weapons online and charging the primary reactors. "The other way is for all of you to live long enough to carry on the fight, to show the galaxy what we died for." The first hegemony bombardment ships dropped out of hyperspace, their massive forms blotting out the stars. Korath's flagship, the Annihilator, led the formation like a dagger pointed at the heart of hope itself. 30 seconds to orbital bombardment, Jake reported, his voice unnaturally calm. You need to go. Now, Jake, Elder Voss said softly. What you're doing, it will be remembered. I don't want to be remembered, he replied. I want to be forgotten. Because if you remember me, it means I failed. If you forget me, it means the cause lived on without needing heroes. The bombardment began with a sound like the universe tearing apart. Plasma beams lanced down from orbit, turning the surface of Nexus 7 into molten glass, but they weren't hitting the base. They were hitting empty space, decoy projections, phantom targets that existed only in the enemy's sensors. What the hell? I breathed. Holographic countermeasures, Jake explained. The Lost Legion was big on misdirection. The real base is 3 kilometers deeper than the hegemony thinks. Hope flared in my chest. Maybe he could survive this after all. That hope died when I saw what he was really planning. The base's fusion reactors were being overloaded, their safety systems disabled one by one. Not to power weapons or shields, but to create the biggest explosion in Nexus 7's history. An explosion timed to coincide with the moment when Korath's fleet moved into optimal bombardment position. You're going to take them with you, I whispered. I'm going to take their entire battle group with me, Jake corrected. 47 ships, including Korath's flagship, the single largest loss the hegemony navy has ever suffered. And the cost. One worn-out soldier who was dead anyway. The evacuation transports lifted off, carrying the last of the base personnel to safety. I watched through the rear viewport as Nexus 7 grew smaller below us, knowing that I was seeing it for the last time. Kira, Jake's voice crackled over the comm, take care of that symbol. Make sure it finds its way to someone who needs it. Jake, don't do this. Please, too late for that. Reactors are past the point of no return. He paused. Tell me something. Do you really think the Lost Legion will rise again? I looked around the transport at the faces of beings from a dozen different worlds, all united by a shared cause and a common symbol. At Elder Voss, already planning the next phase of the resistance. At Zane, coordinating with hidden cells across the galaxy. At weapons and supplies that would fuel a war of liberation. Yes, I said firmly. I do. Good. That's all I needed to hear. The explosion was visible from 3 star systems away. A miniature sun bloomed in the darkness, consuming Korath's fleet in nuclear fire. 47 of the hegemony's most advanced warships, including their most feared admiral, reduced to atoms in the space of a heartbeat. But more importantly, the signal it sent echoed across the galaxy. The Lost Legion had returned. Hope was possible. The fight could be won. Within hours, entire sectors were in open revolt. Hegemony garrison forces found themselves outnumbered and outgunned by populations they'd thought were pacified. The supply lines crumbled as sympathizers sabotaged shipments. Even some hegemony officers began defecting, unable to justify serving a regime that had lost its moral authority. The symbol spread like wildfire. Not just the patch or the hologram, but the idea it represented, that different species could fight together as equals, that freedom was worth dying for. That sometimes hope required sacrifice. 3 months later, I stood on the bridge of the Liberation Fleet's flagship, watching as the last hegemony stronghold surrendered. The war wasn't over. Not completely, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The galaxy was free, or would be soon. Elder Voss approached, carrying a small package wrapped in ceremonial cloth. What's that? I asked. Jake's uniform, she said simply. Recovered from the wreckage, the symbol survived. I unwrapped it carefully, revealing the phoenix patch in all its glory. The fabric was scorched and the edges were frayed, but the image was still clear. Wings spread wide, 7 stars forming a crown, rising from flames that could never quite consume it. What do we do with it now? Elder Voss smiled. We wait. Somewhere out there is another lost soul who needs to believe in something greater than themselves. When they're ready, the symbol will find them. And if it doesn't, it will. That's what hope does. It finds a way. I looked out at the stars, at the free worlds and liberated systems that stretched from the galactic core to the outer rim. Jake had been wrong about one thing. He wouldn't be forgotten. None of them would be, but he'd been right about what mattered most. The cause had lived on. The Lost Legion had risen again, and somewhere in the darkness between the stars, the symbol waited for its next bearer. Hope, it turned out, was indeed contagious, and it was absolutely, positively, incurably terminal for tyrants everywhere.